Hey there! This is gonna be a bit different than usual, but I've been wanting to make this video for ages now. And since I've recently hit my 2-year anniversary on YouTube, I figured that's as good an excuse as any to gush about stories I dearly love. Also, just on that note, my heartfelt thanks to everyone who has been supporting the channel for the past years. I truly appreciate all of you from the bottom of my heart. It's been such an enjoyable ride, and I'm tremendously proud of the videos I put out the past year. I definitely feel like I've stepped up my game a lot compared to the first year. Also, I've gotten to meet some absolutely brilliant and wonderful people in the wider Blue Lock community, so huge shout outs to everyone who's made this such a wonderful journey. And by the way, I'd love to hear in the comments if there's any particular video of mine that jumped out to you, that maybe resonated with you for whatever reason. It always fills me with joy to read stuff like that. Anyways, onto the list. To quickly set out the criterion for this ranking, this will be a list of the 10 manga that I've found the most enjoyable or that have meant the most to me personally. I'm not taking into account issues like popularity, wider cultural impact, or general artistic merit. That's not to say that I believe that art is completely subjective, that Kiss X Sis is equal to Tezuka's Buddha because it's all just an opinion, man. Rather, think of this as my list of manga that I would bring with me to a deserted island. I'll also mention when I believe these series get truly great, since a number of these can be a bit of a slow burn. And just to anticipate the comments that I'll surely get on this, chances are I've read this or that popular and well-regarded shonen/seinen series that isn't on this list. And chances are I liked it as well. There just aren't that many slots to go around in a top 10. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Number 10. Number 10 is Zettai Karen Children by Takashi Shina. This is very much a story that I'd struggle to recommend to others for a variety of reasons. For one, the series concluded 3 years ago, but the final 100 chapters still haven't been translated, and there's not much hope that they will be anytime soon. The final third is also commonly agreed to be significantly weaker than what came before, so whenever a new chapter does manifest somehow, it just feels like I'm reading a husk of its former self. Also, the main characters are 10 years old at the start of the manga, and the series makes pedo jokes uncomfortably often. Mind you, I'm not sure if I'd say that it directly sexualizes 10-year-olds, but its tone definitely appears to condone or normalize the notion. So, with all that being said, what's this series about and why does it make the list? Very briefly, Zettai Karen Children is a sci-fi action comedy set in an alternative contemporary world where more and more people are developing psychic powers. In Japan, the use of ESP is heavily regulated and controlled by the Japanese government. As it happens, the most powerful espers in the country are 3 10-year-old girls, and all their lives have been defined by their powers. So basically, this is a coming-of-age story about what it means for children to have military-grade superpowers at their disposal and to be shunned by society at large because of this. Oh, and they're predicted to be at the center of an Esper insurrection 10 years down the line, so that's also a cause for concern. There was actually a period where I would have cited ZKC as my favourite manga, period. For one, it's got one of the most lovable casts of characters I've ever seen. It also gets the blend of comedy and more serious and emotional storytelling just right for me. It's not easy at all to pull off a story that can seamlessly flit from coming-of-age narrative to sci-fi thriller to Death Note parody in the blink of an eye. Also, I guess I just like ESP in all fairness. So when does this get good? I'd say the biggest jump in quality comes once you reach the middle school era, which starts at chapter 138. Number 9. I'm probably gonna upset a subset of viewers here, but I find writer Nisio Isin a real wanker. He just comes across as the kind of person who wants to rub in your face how clever he is at every turn, even though he isn't quite as smart as he thinks he is. But that being said, there's one series of his that's exactly my cup of tea. Medaka Box, the manga he created with artist Akira Akatsuki, is basically a kind of generic thought experiment that prods at and interrogates the conventions of the shonen battle manga genre by centering its narrative around the ludicrously perfect, overpowered protagonist Medaka Kurokami. Now, when I say prods and interrogates, I don't mean that it's a deconstruction of shonen tropes. To be honest, I often find pure deconstruction just kinda lazy writing. Having your entire story just be pointing a finger and laughing at genre conventions isn't very compelling to me. Medaka Box's approach, however, leans much more on the playful, experimental side of things. Especially in its second half, the manga lays it out very overtly that this is metafiction, and uses that level of self-awareness to propel the narrative in incredibly creative and fun ways. Like, at one point you get an immortal villain with infinite superpowers who understands that they're never going to win against the protagonist because they're genre savvy. So instead, they decide to just wait for the protagonist to graduate or try to change the story's genre so that Medaka is no longer the protagonist. Then there's this antagonist slash anti-hero character whose entire meta shtick is that he's the eternal loser. And yet, the manga posits him as one of the most compelling antagonists and continuously finds interesting ways for him to have his W's while also keeping up his losing streak. Medaka Box is very much the kind of story where I genuinely can't say if it's good writing, but God, I've never seen metafiction done with such manic, gratifying energy, and I love this series for it. As for when this series gets good, Medaka Box reaches its greatest heights starting with the Kumagawa incident arc at chapter 56. Number 8. Just to put this in perspective, one of my biggest childhood dreams was actually to become a cartoonist. Turns out I'm just really shit at drawing though, so I guess I had to settle for talking about comics instead. So anyways, I was about 16 years old when I watched episode 2 of Bakuman, the second series by Death Note authors Tsugumi Ohba and Takashi Obata, and I've never been hit by such an unquenchable desire to create. Bakuman is a manga about two teenagers who set out to become a pair of professional manga artists, and episode/chapter 2 ends with them gaining access to a bona fide manga studio. I just can't put into words how many goosebumps that moment gave me. This was the closest narrative equivalent of unleashing a child in a candy shop I've ever experienced. Bakuman is a story that lives and breathes the joy of drawing, of writing, of creating, and it's had such a profound influence on my relation to my own creativity. If I was ranking manga based on the impact they've had on my life, this series would be a serious contender for one of the top spots. Yet at the same time, I also love how much insight Bakuman provides on the manga industry and manga writing itself. There's a whole host of weebs out there, myself very much included, whose entire understanding of the manga industry has been single-handedly shaped by the crash course that is Bakuman. And while this is mainly due to the age at which I first encountered this series, I honestly believe that it's had a major influence on the ways that I analyze and critique manga, even to the present day. Bakuman is a bit different from most other entries in this series in that its first half is by far the strongest part. For me at least, the story is at its very best from the first chapters up to the greatest moment of narrative catharsis in the series, which I'll describe to avoid spoilers as the scene where protagonists finally get their first #1 chapter ranking. Also, for what it's worth, one of the first YouTube videos I ever put out is an hour-long analysis of the intertextual aspects of Bakuman, and it's to date my best performing non-Blue Lock video on the channel. And in all honesty, I think it's still a fantastic analysis that's held back by its poor production quality. I had really terrible gear at the time and didn't know what I was doing either, so I would love to remake this video in the foreseeable future. Going to number 7, and to be honest, I went back and forth for ages on the relative order of places 7 and 6. So on the arbitrary 7th spot, I've got Akasuka's Kaguya-sama Love is War. For those who aren't familiar with it, the central conceit of Kaguya-sama is as follows. The manga features two mastermind protagonists who are deeply infatuated with each other. However, both of them are convinced that expressing your love is a sign of weakness, and so they engage in stupidly intricate mind games to force the other to confess their feelings first. It's comedic gold from the very first chapter, really. But what truly elevates this manga is that it gradually reveals layer upon layer of psychological depth to its main cast, until it pulls away the rug from underneath our feet and reveals that we've been bamboozled from the very start. I really can't get more concrete than that, just because any attempt to explain the appeal of Kaguya-sama involves heavy spoilers. I put out a video ages ago though, where I break this down in full detail, so I'd highly recommend that if you're familiar with the series and want to hear my take on it. But basically, you come into the series for the hilariously absurd romance as keikaku premise, only to find that you've gotten fully invested in its surprisingly complex, lovable characters and its genuinely beautiful depiction of love and human relationships. And man, the big climactic moment is something else. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I was in tears every single time I reread those scenes while working on my analysis video. So as for when it gets good, there are two benchmarks really. Kaguya-sama is top-tier comedy from the very beginning, but the part that truly consolidated this series as an all-time favourite for me was the sports festival, which starts around chapter 80. That brings me to number 6, which is a series I seem to bring up quite a bit in the context of sports manga discussions, and that's Yuki Suetsugu's Chihayafuru. This manga follows eponymous protagonist Chihaya Ayase, who has an unhealthy obsession with Karuta, this competitive Japanese card game. Unfortunately, there's no one among her peers who really cares about this obscure hobby. Yet, Chihaya persists and eventually founds a Karuta club in her school. This is what really offers one of the most unique aspects to the series. Chihayafuru affords equal weight to Chihaya's journey of becoming the #1 Karuta player and to the club dynamics of how she and her clubmates nurture the Mizusawa Karuta Club into a competitive powerhouse that will persist even when the founding members eventually pass the torch. But more than that, Chihayafuru's most prominent theme is the power of community and connection. What really sets Chihayafuru apart from other sports manga is the amount of attention it gives to the whole infrastructure that surrounds and required to run a competitive sport. The ethos of this story is that it takes a village to raise a champion athlete, and so it makes all the coaches, readers, and other volunteers just as or even more compelling and lovable as its main characters, its main competitors. You'll find yourself tearing up for the Karuta champion who has to choose between motherhood and the community she dearly loves. For the elderly reader who had to give up her passion to care for her ill husband. For the coach who makes one last valiant effort to claim the Meijin title despite this being too physically taxing at his present age. The series is also filled with characters who struggle with issues of self-worth because they can't quite breach the top. And yet, time and again, the world of Kaguya eventually offers them place, community, and purpose. As a warning, this series will make you cry a lot. And in particular, if you're a fan of Haikyuu or March Comes In Like a Lion, I guarantee that you'll fall in love with this manga. To be honest, I find it difficult to tell exactly from when this manga is pure peak, as it's the only series on this list that I've read only once. If memory serves me well though, I think I fell in love with it during their first time at Nationals, which starts in volume 4. Number 5 was really tricky to rank because it's almost impossible to compare a volume-length one-shot to something like the 50-volume behemoth that is Chihayafuru. After completing the first part of Chainsaw Man, Tatsuki Fujimoto took a hiatus where he put out a pair of 2 one-shots that are essentially love letters to his 2 greatest passions, manga and cinema. Both of these, in my opinion, reach the pinnacle of manga as an art form. That's not to say they're necessarily the best written or illustrated manga ever, but rather that I've rarely seen anyone bring out the full potential of manga as an artistic medium to the extent that Fujimoto has in these 2 one-shots. And in particular, the one that resonates with me on a deeply personal level is Look Back, which is perhaps the most relatable depiction of what it means to be a creative person that I've ever encountered. To explain why Look Back speaks to me on such a deep level, I want to tell a bit of a personal story. During the COVID pandemic, Ireland had one of the strictest initial lockdowns in all of Europe, and I was living alone in Dublin at the time. As a result, I didn't see any of my loved ones for 3 months. And so, like many others, I dove headfirst into a newfound COVID hobby to keep myself sane. Specifically, I spent a very significant part of my free time realizing this board game idea that had been in my head for a while. The core rules of my game were fairly simple, with the true complexity being in the various cards and how they interact with and stack up against each other. So, what game design meant for me in practice was not spitting out ideas, letting my creative juices flow wild. Rather, it involved hours upon hours of meticulous playtesting, filling in spreadsheets, calculating probabilities. Now, while that sounds miserable, I really did enjoy the process. It gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed during frightening times where I didn't know if we'd ever go back to normal. So one day, after months of tinkering, I gathered all my courage and asked my best friends if they would be interested in testing the game on an online platform. And mind you, I was quivering in my boots about doing this. Not because I thought they'd refuse or ridicule me. My friends aren't assholes like that. But because of a much more terrifying prospect. What if they don't like it? What if all I get was a muted response and some polite compliments? To me at the time, showing my creative works felt like baring my heart and soul, and there was a very real possibility that all my hard work would be invalidated, that my ideas and passions would just be proven not to be good enough, that I'm, I guess, not a worthwhile person. So then the moment of truth arrived, and we played for an entire day. The game had some deep flaws. It was very clear that there was still so much room for improvement. And yet, my friends actually had fun. They were invested, strategizing, and we spent hours discussing and theorizing afterwards. I still remember this as one of the happiest moments of my life. Seeing other people genuinely enjoy themselves through something that I had created gave me such a deep sense of fulfillment, and just that one moment made what might have been close to 100 hours of solitary tinkering feel worth it. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I would even be doing this whole YouTube thing right now if it wasn't for that day. Look Back is the story of Fujino, a girl that draws manga, and more specifically about what it means to lead a creative life. And with that, I don't mean the dramatic twists and turns of a Bakuman, or the electrifying moments when you're hit with a sudden spark of insight, a sudden spark of inspiration. Instead, what Fujimoto truly hones in on is the soul-crushing monotony of drawing, the seemingly endless stretches of time that it takes to draft even the most simplest of stories. Look Back is a manga filled with pages upon pages of repetitive panels to capture the isolation and sacrifices required to create art. It's the story of Fujino sitting alone, abandoning her friends, forsaken pleasure and community. From the paneling alone, you're forced to question what is even the purpose of all her efforts, of all these years of endurance. And yeah, eventually she falters and decides to abandon this useless endeavor. But right then, she has a fateful encounter with her reclusive classmate Kyomoto and discovers that this girl had been reading her silly manga all these years. That brings me to one of my favorite moments in all of fiction. Fujino heads home, all alone in the fields, and she just bursts out from pure joy, dancing in the rain. All that from the one compliment, the sudden realization that years of seemingly futile labor actually meant something to a single person, from forming a genuine connection with another person through your art. Also, just to point out, Fujino and Kyomoto spells Fujimoto. I see what you did there. The magic of Look Back is that its artwork conveys more than words ever could, thereby demonstrating the pure power of manga as an art form. Towards the end of this story, Fujino finally expresses her own feelings about her craft. You know, to begin with, I don't even like drawing manga. It's not fun. The entire process is a hassle. It's super unglamorous too. You can draw all day long and still be nowhere near finished. Really, I'd be better off just sticking to reading manga. I shouldn't draw it. Of course, that leads to the inevitable question. So why does she keep drawing manga? And then we flip the pages. So why do I keep creating? Why am I investing a significant part of my free time into something that will never pay off? Why do I spend so many of my waking hours all alone, writing, editing? I could play a video game. I could attend a concert, see a play. I could travel. I could spend time with my loved ones. It would be so easy to quit. On that note, let me get to what might be the most controversial pick on this list. On place 4, I've got Blue Lock. Now, I figure I don't need to introduce this series or explain what makes it so appealing. You can watch me break down everything I love about this manga for literal hours after all. And let's be real, Blue Lock has been such an important part of my life for the past 2 years. By this point, I'm thinking about Blue Lock every single day. There are few other things in existence that have occupied me so much. Things I've kept revisiting and picking apart. And every single time, I've found more to appreciate about this manga. But if I were to set out the main things that make me keep coming back, it'd be the following. Firstly, Blue Lock's conceptual profoundness. The way all parts of this manga come together in a coherent, tantalizingly meaningful and deeply intricate worldview. Secondly, the psychological depth of its characters, how Kaneshiro uses egotism as a lens to lay bare the soul of people from all walks of life, their values, their struggles, and uses these walks of life, and uses these as a vehicle for their deeply personal journey. And, lastly, the truly poetic way the series uses metaphor to heighten the reality of the Blue Lock world into something more than just a game of football. I also know that I don't need to convert any of you, but if I wanted to get someone new into Blue Lock, I'd tell them to keep reading until volume 8, to the 3v3 featuring Barrow's Awakening. This is the moment where it became truly apparent to me that Blue Lock is doing something special, that this series is more than just an edgy football comic. Now, the 3 titles I'm about to list occupy a truly special place in my heart. They are stories that are incredibly meaningful to me, like on a level beyond everything I've gushed about so far. But before getting to that, I do want to thank my generous donors, my €10 patrons, Patrician Pat, Orangey Legend, and Trishula the Best Boy. I can't say this enough, but I really appreciate all of you. So for third place, I've got Chika Umino's Honey and Clover. To put it simply, this is a story about a group of friends attending art school who are all stuck in life and stuck in love. University in this series is a liminal space for people who are no longer children, but not quite adults either. And despite the years passing by, they just can't seem to make the transition and move on. I've never seen something that quite captures the messiness of being a young adult like Honey and Clover. Its cast is trapped in these one-sided crushes, can't figure out what to do with their lives, and they're both the sweetest, most supportive group of friends you'll ever meet, but also one where you just can't help but wonder if it wouldn't be better for them, in all fairness, to just cut each other off. Honey and Clover is a gut-wrenching story that's guaranteed to make you bawl your eyes out. I love these guys so much. What's really feeding into my assessment though is my personal relationship with this series. Honey and Clover is, for me, the quintessential coming-of-age story, and that's definitely because it's been with me for so long. I first fell in love with it around age 15 when I watched the anime, and as I've revisited this story over the years, it felt like something that really grew up with me. Perhaps more so than any other manga I've ever read, my perspective on it has changed every single time I went back to its eternal college students. From my teenage self who couldn't wait to enter university, to me in my own college years, to my personal liminal period between student and adult that was my PhD, and more recently during a period of family tragedy. Each time I noticed how different parts of the story, different characters resonated with me, how I find myself relating to different aspects of the story as I've grown and changed over the years. My Honey and Clover analysis video is also one of the most personal videos I've ever created. I'm not sure if I ever brought this up, but I started the channel right after quitting academia. The reason I had so much time to make YouTube videos at the time was because I was basically unemployed for about 5 months, and this was very much a period where I felt lost, uncertain about where I could even turn now. So let's just say there was definitely an element of self-reflection when I explored Honey and Clover as a series about people stuck in life, unable to let go of something that wasn't healthy for them. So when does this series get good? Honey and Clover is a short manga, only 9.5 volumes long. It's also a fairly continuous story, without clearly delineated sections or arcs. That being said, the manga is still very much finding its footing in volume 1, but it has definitely discovered its voice from the latter parts of volume 2 onwards. At number 2 is what I consider to be the best written manga I've ever read, Yumi Tamura's 7 Seeds. This is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi story where Earth was struck by a meteor that eradicated human civilization. Millennia later, the last remnants of humanity awaken, 5 disparate groups of young adults who are preserved in cryogenic sleep. And over the course of 36 volumes, we follow these survivors as they navigate an unfamiliar and inhospitable environment and eventually come into conflict with each other. The most overtly impressive aspect of this series is how it handles a tremendously large cast of 30-ish characters. Now, that might not seem like much on the surface, but every single one of them has their own story and unique qualities, develops meaningful relationships with other characters, and undergoes some kind of arc in the process. And as for the major characters, the writing is just on another level. I know this is hard to convey, but trust me, that is like nothing I've ever seen in manga, period. Also, can I talk about the conflicts? Seven Seeds isn't a story that's written with some silly good versus evil dichotomy, or one where everyone is just in it out of cynical and selfish purposes. The major conflict of the story is messy, complicated, and the actions of every single character are brilliantly motivated through strongly established backstories that make their eventual tragic clash inevitable. And more than that, even at the end, it doesn't offer easy, feel-good solutions. There's a haunting scene showing how their scars and trauma will remain with them forever, and that some mistakes can't be fixed within the span of an entire lifetime. Something like that takes an incredibly brave writer to pull off. But more than that even perhaps, it's the themes and world building that set this manga apart. Seven Seeds is heavily shaped by ecological concerns and offers some deeply meaningful insights about the place of humanity in the natural world, about the impact of technology, and about how to coexist as part of the circle of life in ways that feel truly profound, sublime even. I put out an hour-long video on the ecological storytelling of Seven Seeds last year, and I still consider that my best script to date. Now, I have to admit that Seven Seeds is a bit of a slow burn, and the art has its ups and downs as well, so it's not the easiest series to recommend. The first arc that displays the true strengths of this series starts in volume 8, but once you hit volume 12, you'll get 4 back-to-back S-tier arcs up to the conclusion of the story. And for reference, when I say S-tier, I mean something that is at least as good as the U20 match, and to be honest, probably a lot better even. I binged over 20 volumes of this series in a single weekend, which is something I've never done before or since, just because I couldn't stop reading. That might have left you wondering, what would I put on place number 1? And given that much of this list is comprised of more niche series, I'm a bit ashamed to give such a normie-ass answer. I'm a massive One Piece fan. Now, there are literally thousands of videos on this platform that will tell you what makes One Piece so great, and I don't really feel like reinventing the wheel here. Truth be told, the simplest explanation for One Piece being my favourite manga is, again, a matter of personal relationship with this series. I started watching One Piece at age 14 and caught up to the manga a year later. This was right at the end of Impel Down for what it's worth. So at this stage, I've been a One Piece fan for over half my life, and getting a new chapter has been a highlight of my semi-weekly routine for as long as I can remember, basically. I can probably tell you where One Piece was at during the various stages of my life, and it's a story that I've revisited time and again across the years. Also, One Piece just has one of my favourite fandoms. I know that there are plenty of toxic power scalers and the like out there, but if you scratch away the superficial stuff, you'll just find such a welcoming group of fans with a deep passion of the story. I guess the advantage of an 1100 chapter epic is that it does filter out the people who don't quite connect with the story. The level of analysis, theory crafting and so forth in the One Piece fandom is unlike anything I've ever encountered elsewhere, and most everyone is just so excited about seeing new people fall in love with the series. I've been going back and forth about whether to include this part in the video, because I would find it fundamentally repulsive to use this story for my own benefit. However, I really want to share it. I think it's really important to share it, both because I still think about this person a lot, and because to me, it's the truest encapsulation of what it means to be a One Piece fan. In August of 2021, Twitter user Lolonoa posted a 4-page letter to the One Piece community, parts of which I will be quoting here. You can find a link to the full post in the video description. It's late at night, and everything is filled with sorrow, fear, and despair. I don't know where to start and how to start. I am a 27-year-old Afghan who lives in Talibanistan, and probably the only One Piece fan from here. I've been watching the series and reading the manga for more than 4 years now. I can't express very well how much I love this story. It's a story that made me feel emotional for the villains, a story that made me cry countless times, and that for a mere ship. A story that made me wonder about how the good and evil in the world work. A story that made me ponder about what true justice is. A story that made me want to sail the seas and be free. A story that pushed me to have dreams, and a story that is basically a real-life experience, a journey. Most of you might be aware of the current situation in Afghanistan. Yes, Afghanistan has fallen to the Taliban, not by force, but through a systematic handover by the so-called democratic government. As the Taliban furthered their control in Afghanistan and captured the capital city at lightning speed amidst the US forces' withdrawal, fears of mass human rights violations have been resurrected. Indisputably, it is the minorities who are threatened the most. As a person who belongs to Hazara Shia minority in Afghanistan, worked with international clients, infidels to them, as a freelance graphic designer, can't grow a beard/mustache, which is a sin, speaks a different language, and belongs to a different religion/mazhab. I am extremely endangered, but my biggest fear is for my family. After the Taliban seized power in 1996, they declared jihad on the Shia Hazaras. In the years that followed, Hazaras faced particularly severe repression and persecution, including a series of mass killings in northern Afghanistan, where thousands of Hazaras lost their lives. I burned my documents and everything I've ever achieved. Everything that they consider is against Islam. Everything related to non-Muslim countries. When cleaning and deleting my files from my hard drive, I couldn't delete the One Piece contents. I value them too much. But I can't give them an excuse. For the first time in my life, I wished One Piece was shorter, so I could see Luffy become Pirate King. So I could see the revelation of One Piece, the reunion of Shanks and Luffy, Zoro and Mihawk, Usopp and Yasopp, Straw Hats and Vivi. The revelation of the Will of D and other mysteries that I've waited for their answers for years. I will miss all the theory videos, all the reaction videos, the Reverie, Totally Not Mark's Act 3 video, Murphy's PTS videos. I will miss everything. This might be my very last interaction with the One Piece community. Thank you, Nakamas, for everything. I haven't achieved anything big that people remember me. So I wrote this to let you all know that One Piece is vast and beautiful. And as much as one of you read and remember this nameless letter, I will not die. The letter ends with one of the most beloved quotes in the series. When do you think people die? When they are shot through the heart by a bullet of a pistol? No. When they are ravaged by an incurable disease? No. When they drink a soup made from a poisonous mushroom? No. It's when they are forgotten. I don't know how Lolonoa is doing. They posted once more 2 years later, in 2023. The Drums of Liberation, the awakening of Sun God Nika, the truest manifestation of freedom and joy. I'm sure you're not watching this, and even if you are, words don't suffice. You feel helpless when you read something like this, and there isn't anything you can do. But one thing I just do want to show you.